Order, order. We start with questions. Secretary of State for Wales, Rebecca Smith.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in sending our deepest sympathy to the family, friends and neighbours of Joanne Penny, who was callously murdered in Talbot Green on Sunday, a shocking and horrific crime. We have protected the smallest businesses and more than doubled the employment allowance to £10,500, meaning that over half of small and micro businesses will pay less or no national insurance contributions at all. And in Wales, small and medium-sized enterprises account for 99.3% of total enterprises.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses across Wales, like those also in my constituency of South West Devon, are being hit not only by Labour's job tax, but also increasing minimum wage, rising costs and other business tax increases. Each of these alone would force many to reduce their workforce, but the combination of all three means businesses are thinking twice about filling job vacancies or creating new posts. What reassurances can the Minister give to businesses across Wales, and indeed like circles in my constituency, that their business has a promising future between now and the next election, when the Labour budget is showing them the complete opposite?
Can I thank the honourable member for her question? If the party opposite cares so much about employment and business in Wales, then perhaps she should explain to her colleagues in the Senedd why they voted last week to block thousands of new apprenticeships and over £300 million of support for businesses in Wales. Her party voted against it.
Oh, right, let us go to the front bench. Show Secretary of State Minns Davies.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Secretary of State. Who is she battling for, Kazakhstan or Wales? Due to Labour's political choices, countless jobs in Wales are at risk due to the national insurance rise. It's clear to see the damaging impact it's having in the Minister's own backyard, with reportedly over 1,800 jobs at risk at Cardiff University, among many sectors who are desperately trying to stay afloat due to the Welsh Government's jobs tax, the Labour Government's impact on the Welsh economy. With Cardiff University ploughing on with their Kazakhstan campus, can the Right Honourable Lady be happy with the offshoring of these roles in this sector and many others because of the fallout of the autumn budget continuing?
Tuesday.
I'm not sure where the honourable member has got this idea about outsourcing jobs from. It was her party that told our universities across the country to go out and recruit international students, which they did. And now, because of that, and because of what's happened under her last government's watch, those international students are not coming anymore. But she should again look to her colleagues in the Senedd. Education budget, her party voted against. She needs to talk to her colleagues in the Senedd.
Right, we come to David Chabot, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Mr. Speaker, the national insurance increase is set to hit high streets in Wales hard, with many traders saying that they will be laying off staff as a result. Last week, the government announced £100 million worth of funding to be spent on reinvigorating Welsh high streets, but no towns in the Swansea, Neath or Ammon valleys were included on that list. Can the Secretary of State clarify the criteria that was used to select the successful towns, and whether or not areas like Ystalyfera can expect to benefit from future funding? Because that's one high street that's certainly worth investing in.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question? The criteria for the announcement last week is publicly available, and I suggest he has a look at it.
We now come to Liv Savile-Roberts.
And I'm sure the House will join me in remembering the Llandow air disaster in which 80 people lost their lives 75 years ago. Elaine's hair salon in Llanrug, Piti and Partian nursery in Llanwnder, care homes and GP surgeries across Dwyfo Meirionnydd. They tell me that national insurance hikes coming in just a few weeks will stop them hiring new staff. Her government says they're cutting welfare to get people into jobs. What jobs?
Plaid Cymru's manifesto for the general election had £5 billion of unfunded commitments. If her party was in power, we'd be facing the same legacy that we had from the party opposite, a £22 billion black hole, which has meant we have had to take difficult decisions. But in her constituency, they will want to have more investment in our NHS, more investment in our public services, more investment to support businesses. Her party voted against it all in the Welsh budget.
Let's have a Roberts.
And if her government agreed with her counterparts in Cardiff, we would have the money from the Crown Estate as well. But back in 2015, the Secretary of State and I walked through the same voting lobby against what she then described as despicable Tory welfare cuts. And she dared to break the Labour whip to do so back then. Given this evidence of her strong convictions on the issue, how can she justify remaining in a cabinet intent on implementing Tory-style welfare cuts?
We have inherited a Tory welfare system that is the worst of all worlds. It's got the wrong incentives, it discourages people from working, the people who really need a safety net are still not getting the dignity and support that they need, and the taxpayer is funding an ever-spiralling bill. It's unsustainable, it's indefensible and it's unfair. Our principles for reform are clear: supporting those who need support, restoring trust and fairness in the system, fixing that broken assessment process and disincentives, and supporting people to start, stay and succeed in work. She should support that as well.
Stephen Gethings.
Two, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met with the Deputy First Minister to discuss a wide range of issues, including the Crown Estate. The UK and Welsh governments are focused on taking maximum advantage of the opportunities that floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea presents for Wales, which could create over 5,000 jobs and £1.4 billion of investment to the UK economy in the coming years.
Stephen Gethings.
Diolch, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the 2011 SNP manifesto, the SNP committed to have 100% equivalent of Scotland's electricity being generated from renewables. The SNP met that target and then some, thanks to the devolution of the Crown Estate and working with industry that is now delivering jobs and clean green energy to Scotland, but also throughout the UK. Why shouldn't Wales have the same opportunity?
I'm afraid I'm not going to take any lectures on the Crown Estate from his party, whose mismanagement of the Scottish seabed has seen Scottish assets sold off on the cheap. We are focused on doing whatever it takes to secure more than 5,000 jobs in Wales and billions of pounds of investment that the Crown Estate can unlock for Wales.
Okay. Tony Antoniazzi.
Mr. Speaker, does the Secretary of State agree with me that the government's priority should be ensuring that the Crown Estate can unlock thousands of new well-paid jobs in Wales that will come with floating offshore wind, rather than being distracted by calls to devolve the organisation in the middle of this national mission, risking the investment, jobs and lower energy bills Wales desperately needs?
Mr. Speaker, she's absolutely right. I, like her, want to see people in Wales benefit from those 5,300 new jobs, particularly young people who then don't have to leave Wales, where they've grown up, to earn or learn. I want to see that £1.4 billion boost to the economy. We are not prepared to put all of that at risk, the risk of market fragmentation, of undermining or potentially destroying developer confidence in flow, and then have to watch that investment go elsewhere in the world.
John Cooper.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Well, with your permission, I will answer question 3 and question 8 together. I've spoken to farming unions in Wales and understand their strength of feeling. These changes are expected to affect around 500 claims across the whole of the UK, with very few being in Wales. Meanwhile, most importantly, we and the Welsh Government have protected the farming budget at its current level, whilst the Welsh Conservatives tried to block that money from reaching farmers by voting against the Welsh Government budget last week.
Mr. Speaker, the Scotland Office is conducting a series of agricultural roundtables, talking directly to farmers and putting together statistics to push back against this orthodoxy that only a tiny number of very wealthy estates are going to be affected. That's simply not the case. This increasingly looks like a war on farmers by the Treasury. What part are you playing in fighting back against this?
Well, Well, Mr. Speaker, the Treasury is absolutely confident in its figures, and specific questions on methodology is a matter for the Treasury. But what I can tell him, and I will repeat it, is expected to only affect 500 claims for agricultural property relief across the whole of the UK, with very few being in Wales. As he knows, we are absolutely committed to our farmers through keeping the £337 million block grant, which Welsh Government has passed on to farmers directly.
Charlie Dewhurst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Farmers across the UK have already been rocked by the changes to APR and BPR, and yesterday we had the shock news in England that DEFRA will take no new applications for SFI. So what reassurances can the Minister give to farmers in Wales that the Sustainable Farming Scheme will be delivered in full and on time on the 1st of January next year?
Well, as he knows, my good friend, the First Minister of Wales, has spent a lot of time talking to farmers, and we have absolutely protected the budget, and Welsh Government has also protected that budget for farmers, so the full £337 million will be going directly to farmers, in spite of his colleagues in the Senate trying to block it last week.
Select Committee, Ruth Jones. No.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Welsh Affairs Select Committee is launching its inquiry into farming in Wales this week because we know farming is a cornerstone of the Wales economy. Now, the Welsh Government budget contained over £300 million to support Welsh farmers. So does the Minister agree with me that it's a shame the opposition parties are playing fast and loose with farmers' livelihoods by voting against the Welsh Government budget last week?
Well, indeed, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, the Chair of the Welsh Affairs Committee, is absolutely right. It was an utter disgrace that the parties opposite decided to vote against the budget last week, which effectively is trying to block money going to the farmers. What a disgrace.
Shall the Secretary of State, Mims Davis?
This government have said that they are concerned, like we all are, about our future security. So why is food security expendable in Wales and beyond? That's the message from farmer Stella Owen from NFU Cymru, who termed their actions as destructive and threatens the future of family farms across Wales. Mr. Speaker, how many of those family farms is the Minister prepared to see go under before she and the Secretary of State will step up and act in the interests of this key sector to help worried and frankly livid men and women who are worried and fearing for their livelihoods?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure she has been reminded many times, difficult decisions had to be made to fund our public services, but the changes still leave a significant amount of relief in place. Farming parents will typically be able to pass on up to £3 million to their children without paying any inheritance tax at all, and above this amount, inheritance tax will be paid at a reduced effective rate of up to 20% rather than the standard 40%. Estates have up to 10 years to pay any tax due, and this will be interest-free. These payment terms are not available to others. This is a fair and balanced approach that continues support for family farms, whilst also fixing the public services that we rely on, including farmers.
Jones.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
I have regular discussions with my Welsh Government colleagues about health, and I'm pleased to see clear progress in cancer services in Wales. In December, performance against the 62 day cancer target was the best we've seen since August 2021. But no one should ever be complacent about cancer. And that is why our two governments are absolutely committed to working closely on cancer, to share best practice and to deliver better outcomes for patients across England and Wales.
Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since August 2020, not a single health board in Wales has met their cancer target, leaving patients waiting months for their referral to start treatment. And despite recommendations to properly implement screening programmes, the standard for uptake is not being achieved, leading to poorer health outcomes. As the Department of Health embark on developing a cancer strategy for England, how will the Secretary of State for Wales ensure these issues are not repeated in England?
Well, what I can tell him is that there is now positive progress on waiting lists. Both governments are working together in a spirit of genuine collaboration to cut NHS waiting lists and build an NHS fit for the future. The Welsh Government have committed more than £600 million in extra funding for health and social care in their budget for 25-26, and they're also setting up a National Cancer Leadership Board to improve cancer care. Thanks to these investments, the Welsh NHS services are improving, including on cancer, and waiting lists are falling.
Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my honourable friend outline how she is working in partnership with the Welsh Government to improve cancer and health outcomes? And could she try and help me understand why on earth, in the budget vote last week, the Conservatives and Plaid Cymru voted against £600 million more in our Welsh NHS?
I really cannot explain why the Conservative colleagues in the Senate voted against this budget, because not only is the Welsh Government delivering on £600 million, but they are also delivering a specific package on cancer care. And the initial phase, which is going to focus on breast, skin, gynecological, lower gastrointestinal and neurological cancer, will improve productivity and efficiency in how health boards deliver care. And this includes sending people straight to test without an outpatient appointment. Alongside this, Welsh Government are implementing a wider range of service improvements, from reducing smoking and tackling obesity to HPV vaccination and diagnostic and genomic strategies.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wales has a world-class tourism offer. I fully support the work that the Welsh Government is doing to support the tourism sector in Wales through Visit Wales and other initiatives. Last month, the UK Government announced a £15 million investment for Venue Cymru in Llandudno and the Newport Transporter Bridge. These are two key projects that will help boost the tourism and culture sector in Wales.
Thank her for her answer. The tourism and hospitality sector in the UK is one of the most heavily taxed in Europe. Will she press the Chancellor to reduce the tax burden in this area to help drive local economies that rely on tourism in Wales and in constituencies like mine on the Isle of Wight?
I would gently remind the gentleman opposite that his party in government put the highest tax burden in 70 years on the people and businesses of this country, leaving a £22 billion black hole that we have had to try and sort out.
Henry Tufnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than 40 countries and holiday destinations around the world have introduced a form of visitor levy, including Greece, Amsterdam, Barcelona and California. So can the Secretary of State outline the work she is doing with the Welsh Government to support our vital tourism industry?
The honourable member has one of the most beautiful constituencies in Wales, and I know tourism is very critical for his local economy. Indeed, probably tourism remains the only way to see a Conservative MP in Wales after the general election. The visitor levy is set to raise up to £33 million for tourism sector across Wales. Last week, Conservatives in the Senedd voted to block £15.6 million in support for Welsh tourism.
So, Secretary of State Minister Davis.
Sadly, there will be no more Easter family fun at Oakwood. They've made it clear that their final demise after COVID was Labour's looming tourism tax, job tax and sky-high business rates from the Senedd, meaning it's all over. Mr. Speaker, how many more tourist and hospitality businesses need to tell the UK Government that their closed signs will be going up and staying up due to decisions made by the Treasury? Will this Secretary of State stand up for businesses and jobs in Wales who know they are being taken for the worst ride possible, frankly even more vomit-inducing than megaphobia, by this government of broken promises?
Last week, her colleagues in the Senedd voted against extra money for tourism. They did. Now, maybe she should have a conversation with Darren Miller in the Senedd, her colleague, but I don't think they're having that sort of conversation at the moment because they're still arguing about who's leading the Tories in Wales.
Douglas McAllister.
Question number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I regularly meet with the First Minister to discuss a wide range of matters, including NHS waiting lists. The latest data shows positive progress in reducing long waiting times and the size of the waiting list, thanks to investment by both the UK and Welsh governments.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm appalled to hear that Plaid Cymru voted against £600 million extra investment to bring down NHS waiting lists in Wales. But I'm afraid to say this is a familiar story for our Scottish members. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that nationalist parties will always prioritise niche constitutional distractions over delivering priorities for working families, what they need and what they deserve?
Mr. Speaker, I couldn't agree more with my honourable friends, and Plaid Cymru members are going to have to explain to their constituents why they voted against £600 million extra for the NHS last week, blocking crucial funding, reaching our hospitals, NHS staff and patients in Wales.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, one of the issues for the waiting lists in Wales, as it is in all of the United Kingdom, are those who have been waiting for diabetes diagnosis, number one, and then the treatment. There used to be in Westminster a strategy that encompassed just not England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Would the Minister support a similar strategy for the 4 regions together to address the issue of diabetes and what it's doing to this country?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Can I just say nations and regions rather than just regions? But I'm very happy to have a discussion with him outside the chamber about that.
Graham Ledbetter.
Question number 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Our United Kingdom is going from strength to strength and is underpinned by a transformed relationship between the UK and devolved governments. In Wales, this means a partnership between our 2 governments which is delivering on the issues that matter most to people, on reforming the NHS and public services and attracting investment and new jobs through free ports, investment zones and our industrial strategy.
Graham Ledbetter.
Thank you. Thank the Minister for that answer. Today the Senedd will vote on a motion to redesignate HS2 as an England-only project. Previous calculations suggest that Wales missed out on around £4 billion from the project. The Welsh Minister now claim that amount is £431 million. Quite the difference. With the Welsh Government abandoning its ambitions and the UK Government refusing to budge on full consequential funding, is the Labour Party now waving the white flag on Wales missing billions?
Well, the government absolutely acknowledges that the previous Conservative government shortchanged Wales for years on rail investment, including because of HS2. And one of our top priorities is to reverse those years of historic underfunding in Wales. This is infrastructure. So the Secretary of State met the Transport Secretary and Welsh Government Transport Minister Ken States immediately before Christmas, where they agreed on a direction of travel which we hope will deliver new investment for rail in Wales. The UK and Welsh governments have agreed a prioritisation of rail improvement projects developed by the Wales Rail Board. This will inform our respective departments' work in the run-up to the spring spending review.
John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Investment into Wales by the UK government demonstrates the strength of the Union, and I was therefore delighted to see the UK Labour government announce its plan for neighbourhoods that will see £100 million invested in Welsh communities, with £20 million of that going into my constituency of Wrexham, straight into vital local resources like high streets and youth clubs. Will the Secretary of State agree with me that this Labour government is committed to bringing growth to areas of Wales that were previously ignored by the party opposite?
Well, indeed, with UK Government and Welsh Government working together, we've secured more than £1.5 billion investment and hundreds of jobs in Wales. And, of course, we've established those investment zones in Cardiff, Newport, Wrexham and Flintshire to provide a rocket boost to sector strengths like advanced manufacturing.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Question number 9.
Minister.
UK government has delivered the biggest budget settlement in the history of devolution, with £21 billion of new money for the Welsh Government. The Welsh Government is investing almost £200 million this year to support school standards across Wales, plus a further almost £170 million next year. But his Welsh Conservative colleagues tried to block this funding by voting against the Welsh Government budget last week.
Sir Ashley
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Children in Wales have the lowest PISA scores in the United Kingdom and are significantly below the OECD average. Does the Minister believe this could be related in any way to 26 years of Labour government in Wales?
Well, I'll take no lectures from the party opposite. The Conservative tact rings absolutely hollow, given the chronic underfunding of education and public services for the last 14 years when they have been in power. Now, the UK and Welsh governments are working together to ensure every young person has the opportunity to succeed, including by investing over £260 million extra in education and more than £260 million for local government to set school budgets in Wales. In spite of the shenanigans of Plaid and the Conservatives voting against the Welsh Government's budget, Labour are getting on and delivering certainty and support for teachers across Wales through increases to education and local authority budgets.
Jill German, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend welcome, as I do, the additional £20 million announced by Welsh Government last week to improve education standards, on top of the £262 million extra in total for education in Wales? And is she as perplexed as I am as to why the Conservatives and Plaid Cymru voted against extra money for education in the Welsh budget?
Well, like her, I'm absolutely astounded the way that the Plaid Cymru and Conservative Senate members voted against the budget. But the important thing is that this year the Welsh Government will be investing an additional £1.1 million for literacy, numeracy and science support in schools. And we've also, the Welsh Government's also announced an investment of a £10 million package on literacy and numeracy for the coming year, increasing local capacity to support schools, national support programmes and interventions to support struggling learners.
Right, that completes Welsh questions. We now come to questions to the Prime Minister. Mike Martin.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the progress in talks between Ukraine and the United States. We must now redouble our efforts to get a lasting, secure peace. Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, I'll convene international leaders to discuss how we can make further progress. Can I also pay tribute to the bravery and dedication of all those responding to the ship collision off the East Yorkshire coast? Our thoughts, and I'm sure of the whole House, are with the family of the crew member who is sadly presumed dead. Mr. Speaker, this week we introduced landmark legislation to get Britain building, paving the way to restoring the dream of home ownership for working people across the country. We're also driving forward our Employment Rights Bill, the biggest boost to workers' rights in a generation. That's our plan for change in action. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Russia has abducted at least 19,000 Ukrainian children and transferred them to Russia. They have been told that their parents don't love them, they've been placed in Russian homes, and they have been re-educated. For this despicable crime and others, the International Criminal Court has issued 6 arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and his gang. I note the Prime Minister's previous fulsome support for the ICC, and I also note his comments just last night about the support that the UK will offer to Ukraine in achieving a just and lasting peace. Will the Prime Minister confirm to the House that British peacekeeping troops will only be deployed to Ukraine if the peacekeeping deal includes both the return of Ukraine's children and Putin's prosecution?
Well, Mr. Speaker, firstly, I thank you for raising this issue because it is an absolutely terrible case of abduction and kidnapping. And when we say a lasting, just settlement or peace in Ukraine, it must, of course, involve dealing with this issue, and we are, as he would expect, raising it continually with our allies.
John Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Telford and Britain voted for change in July. Yet this week we saw the bizarre spectacle of the Conservatives attempting to bring back the Rwanda policy, clinging onto a gimmick that cost the British taxpayers £700 million, yet only sent 4 volunteers to Rwanda. As Labour works to secure our borders through our plan for change, does the Prime Minister agree with me? It's quite clear the party opposite have done absolutely nothing.
Well, he's quite right. They ran an open borders experiment that saw numbers go up to almost 1 million. And the leader of the opposition was the cheerleader, thanking herself for the lobbying that she did. The Rwanda scheme, yes, Mr. Speaker, £700 million of taxpayers' money to remove 4 volunteers. What a contrast. We've got the flights off. 19,000 people removed who shouldn't be here. As with the NHS, with prisons, the economy, everything else, we're clearing up the mess that they lost.
Leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Later today, the Prime Minister is meeting the family of Sir David Amess. Sir David gave this House and our country 40 years of service. I hope the Prime Minister will agree that getting the response to his murder right is vital, not just to his family, but to our democracy. Mr. Speaker, every week I speak to businesses who are letting go of staff or closing. Has the Prime Minister been given an estimate of how many people will lose their jobs because of his budget?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just on the question of Sir David, he was a deeply loved and respected colleague, and behind me is the plaque, as is the plaque to Joe Cox in front of me. And I know this was deeply felt by the House, but particularly, as I acknowledged at the time, by the party opposite, who lost a colleague and a friend in the most awful of circumstances. Mr. Speaker, I am meeting the Amess family later on today, and will make sure that they get answers to the questions that they ask. Mr. Speaker, in relation to businesses, I'm really pleased to say we've got thousands of new jobs into the economy. We've got more investment in the last 20 years, an absolute record. Wages are up higher than prices. 3 interest rate cuts, the best boost for the cost of living for a very long time.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to get out more. Inflation is up, and estimates of job losses are between 130,000 and 300,000. Okay. His tax rises are hurting every sector of the economy. Things are getting worse for nurseries. Nurseries are writing to stressed parents right now, telling them that fees will go up because of his jobs tax. Can he explain how more expensive childcare is good for the economy or for working families struggling to make ends meet?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're putting in childcare. Look at the breakfast clubs, 2 in her constituency. But she's rather forgetting the £22 billion black hole that they left, that we had to deal with. That's why we had to take the necessary but right measures we did in the budget. And what's her response? Not that she'd reverse them. Oh, no, she doesn't say that. She attacks what we've done, but she doesn't say she would reverse it because she wants all the benefits of our budget in returns of investment, but she doesn't want to pay for it. That's how we got into the mess in the first place.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is out of touch because he should know that nurseries are charging over £2,000 for full-time care. That's £24,000 a year after tax, and he's talking about 60p breakfast clubs. He has no idea what people out there are experiencing, and it is not just the families. Even councils must pay his jobs tax. To cope with it, the average council tax bill is increasing by over £100 in April, after he promised to freeze it. Hard-working families' money is going to the Chancellor instead of social care and fixing potholes. Why should these families pay more for less?
Well, she really shouldn't denigrate what she calls, I think, 60p breakfast clubs. She should be welcoming them. And she asked about council tax, Mr. Speaker. The Tories put up council tax every year for 12 years. their manifesto, Tory LGA manifesto, government should remove the caps on council tax. And then Hampshire Council, Tory, wanted a 15% increase. We said no. Slough Council, again, Mr Speaker, Tory, wanted 3%. We said no. Windsor and Maidenhead, Tory, now Lib Dem, wanted 25%. We said no. We're the ones that are doing the right things to get this country on the right track.
Mr Speaker, the point is he promised to freeze and they are going up. And if he wants to talk about councils, let's look at Liverpool or maybe Birmingham, where the rubbish is piling up so high, people vote Labour and all they get is trash, just like what he's saying at the dispatch box. People all over the country are suffering, not just in Birmingham. Millions of elderly people have had their winter fuel payments snatched away. At the same time, care home fees are set to go up by a devastating £3,000 because of his jobs tax. How does he expect pensioners on a fixed income to make ends meet?
Mr Speaker, this is why it's so important that wages are up higher than prices. That's why it's so important that the interest rates are coming down. This is the biggest boost for the cost of living for a very, very long time. What we're doing is picking up and fixing the mess that they left.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister is not looking at what is happening out there. Every day I speak to businesses who are telling us that they think that they are going bust. And as if businesses and families didn't have enough to worry about, supermarkets say food prices will increase by over 4% because of the jobs tax. And that's before we get to the immoral family farms tax on the very farmers who work so hard to produce our food. What does the Prime Minister have against farmers anyway? Does he not see that his budget is killing farming in this country and he is making life so much harder for everyone else?
Mr Speaker, the budget provided £5 billion for farming over the next 2 years. That is a record amount. We've set out the roadmap for farming, which has been welcomed by farmers. And many thousands of farms have benefited from the farming schemes. But she talks about prices. Wages are going up higher than prices. That's the first in a long time that's happened. So for families across the country, they're better off under Labour.
He's got no answers today. What the farmers are complaining about is the sustainable farming incentive, which he has just scrapped or withdrawn. They are making mistakes with this budget. And that's why in 2 weeks, the Chancellor will come to this House to present an emergency budget the Prime Minister said we would not need. They will try and make out it's because of global events. But the truth is they trash the economy with their bad choices. They said they'd look after pensioners. Then they snatched winter fuel payments. They said that they would be pro-business, but they hiked taxes on jobs. And he, Mr. Speaker, he promised to freeze council tax, but it's going up by £100. This is a high-tax, low-growth, job-killing government. Will he use the emergency budget to fix the mess he's made?
Mr Speaker, inflation under them 11%, £22 billion black hole, a mini budget that made us the laughing stock of the world, and they want to give lectures on the economy to us. No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With 1 in 8 young people across the country not in education, employment or training, people in rugby are worried about a wasted generation. Too many people with disabilities and health conditions are not getting the help that they need to get into work. So will the Prime Minister set out how this government will give everyone who is able to work the support they need, provide compassion to those who can't work, and fix the broken welfare system left behind by, you guessed it, the Conservatives?
I thank him for raising this issue. Mr. Speaker, I come from a family that dealt with disability through my mother and brother over many years, so I do understand the concerns that have been raised by him. But we inherited a system which is broken, it is indefensible economically and morally, and we must and we will reform it. We will have clear principles, Mr. Speaker. We will protect those who need protecting. We will also support those who can work back to work. But Labour is the party of work. We are also the party of equality and fairness.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by giving a shout-out for Young Carers Action Day today, but I promise the House I will not sing. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly spoken about the need to get more people into work, and he repeated that now, so people have more dignity, we can get the economy going, and we can cut the benefits bill after the disgraceful legacy left by the Conservatives.
You were there for 5 years.
But does the Prime Minister recognise that for many disabled people, the best way to help them into work is to support them properly with more special equipment, with training, with better healthcare and so on? And will he also today calm anxieties that he himself has raised for many of us, that the disability benefits for people who simply cannot work will not be cut?
Mr. Speaker, we will, of course, as I've just said, the principles, we will, of course, support those who need support, but also help those who can work into work. They'll be the guiding principles. But what we've inherited is shocking, and they ought to be silent. 1 in 8 young people not in education, work or training. That is a lost generation. That is their inheritance. They've got plenty to say now. They did nothing for 14 years and left this in terrible inheritance.
And Davey. Mr. Speaker, turning to international issues, can I congratulate the Prime Minister on helping to secure the restoration of US military and intelligence support for Ukraine? But can I press him on progress to persuade President Trump against damaging metal tariffs already hitting British industry? The Prime Minister knows that we on these benches believe he must be more robust with President Trump, like the Europeans and like the Canadians. So will the Prime Minister fly out to Canada as soon as possible to show their new Prime Minister and the Canadian people that Britain stands with its Commonwealth allies against Trump's threats and against Trump's tariffs?
Well, Canada is an ally and a very important ally too, and I've spoken to our allies on many occasions about the situation in Canada. On the question of tariffs, obviously, like everybody else, I'm disappointed to see global tariffs in relation to steel and aluminium. But we will take a pragmatic approach. We are, as he knows, negotiating an economic deal which covers and will include tariffs if we succeed. But we will keep all options on the table.
Claire Hannah.
Hi, Fadra Conadív agus Seach na Gaeilge Fosta Deis Con Changa agus our culture Kellaroo or Fodandone. Happy St Patrick's Day, everybody, and happy Irish Language Week as well. An opportunity to use Irish language and culture across the world. It's an increasingly turbulent world, Prime Minister, with relationships and norms turned upside down over recent weeks, and that's why I congratulate the Prime Minister and the Taoiseach for re-establishing warm and firm relationships at their summit last week, and it's reassuring for all of us to know that whatever our constitutional future, that bond is lasting and refreshed. Will the Prime Minister join me in wishing a happy St Patrick's Day to all who value our shared bonds, and can I take this opportunity to invite him to Belfast in August 2027, which was announced this week as the host of the Fleadh na hÉireann for the first time.
Well, can I join her in wishing everybody celebrating a very happy St Patrick's Day? Mr. Speaker, she's right. We need a strong and settled relationship between the United Kingdom and Ireland, and the need for that has never been greater, which is why I was delighted to host the Taoiseach in Liverpool last week at our first annual UK-Ireland Summit. We've turned the page, started a new era for our relationship with Ireland, and I'd be very happy to go to Belfast in 2027. I want to go much sooner than that.
Andrew Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In just 20 days' time, new sentencing guidance will come into effect that the Justice Secretary has already conceded will be two-tier in its nature. It will mean that the colour of your skin or the religion you have can give you leniency in the eyes of the law and will plunge public confidence in the judiciary into crisis. But it is avoidable. We Conservatives have tabled a bill that, if backed on Friday, can stop this guidance in its tracks. So will the Prime Minister, will he now overrule his Justice Secretary and confirm here and now that he will back this bill, or will he simply step aside and prove he has in fact been two-tier Keir all along?
Well, everyone should be equal before the law. That is why the Lord Chancellor has taken up the issue with the Sentencing Council. But he needs to do his homework, because the proposal that he complains about was drafted in 2024, and the last government was consulted. And when they were consulted, what did they say? They said they welcomed the proposal. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand that the Shadow Justice Secretary is taking the Sentencing Council to court. Perhaps he should add himself as the second defendant so we can get to the bottom of the ballroom.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to represent a constituency that has 8 synagogues, a thriving Jewish population, and the UK's largest Jewish cultural centre, JW3. But this week, I was horrified to read reports about rising anti-Semitism on NHS wards, and in particular, a shocking incident in which a Jewish NHS staff member was called a baby killer by their colleague. The NHS that I know and love is open to everyone, regardless of their background. So could I ask the Prime Minister, what is he doing to ensure that my Jewish constituents can safely use our beloved National Health Service?
Well, I thank her for raising these deeply concerning reports. It is completely unacceptable for anyone to experience racism, discrimination or prejudice in the health service. I know my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, takes such reports extremely seriously. It is a fundamental principle that the NHS provides care and treatment for everyone, regardless of race, faith or background. This is a really serious issue. You've let yourself down, you know it. I expect all trusts and healthcare providers to take necessary action against any staff who've expressed views that do not reflect the views and values of the NHS.
Dave Dugan, a closed question.
Question 9, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, he asks about UK-US relations. As he knows and the House knows, I'm committed to strengthening those relations. The US is an indispensable ally. We are working together to try to secure a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. And I've spoken to the President on a number of occasions, including this week.
Dave Dugan.
I agree with the Prime Minister in those sentiments. The ceasefire negotiations this week are a cause for great optimism, and I welcome the efforts that the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, had done in leading that priority. But last week at the dispatch box, the Prime Minister said in answer to my right honourable friend, the member for Aberdeen South, that he had no knowledge of the United States planning to withdraw military aid from Ukraine, yet they did that the following day. It's against that backdrop, because I know the Prime Minister wants a just and lasting peace in Ukraine that respects Ukraine's borders and territorial integrity. When he's impressing that priority upon the President of the United States, what reassurance can he give the House today that the President of the United States is actually listening?
Let me give this reassurance. As soon as that step was taken, I and my team started work to try and ensure that we could get back to a situation of full support for Ukraine. I won't detail everything that was involved over the last week. I can assure him and the House a huge amount of hard work, discussions and diplomacy was used with all of our allies and others to ensure that we could get yesterday to go as well as we hoped it would. I am pleased that we've made progress. I think that's very important for Ukraine, and I'm extremely pleased that support has been put in, backed by the US, for Ukraine. So that's what I did once I understood what had happened. I'm pleased with where we've got to, but as ever, we must go further.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Disabled people in my constituency are frightened. And they're frightened because they're again hearing politicians use the language of tough choices. And they know from bitter experience that when politicians talk about tough choices, it means the easy option of making the poor and vulnerable pay. So instead of cutting benefits for disabled people, wouldn't the moral thing to do, the courageous thing to do, be to make a real tough choice and introduce a wealth tax on the very wealthiest people in our society?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the party opposite left a broken welfare system which locks millions out of work. That is indefensible, in my view, economically and morally. Of course, we need to support people who need support. We need to help those who want to work to get back into work, and I think there's a moral imperative in that. He talks about a wealth tax. We have raised money, the energy profits levy, taxing non-doms and air passenger duty on private jets. But this isn't a bottomless pit, and we must kick-start growth to get the economic stability that we need.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Most people would accept that we need more housing in this country, yet so often it's not accompanied by the necessary infrastructure. In my own constituency, thousands of houses are proposed, yet without the £250 million to upgrade Junction 12 of the M5, the inspector is likely to rule our plan unsound. So will the Prime Minister use his upcoming planning and infrastructure bill to see how developer and landowner contributions can more effectively build this vitally needed infrastructure which would benefit communities up and down the country?
Well, he's right. We have to get the houses built that we need in his constituency and elsewhere, something that the party opposite failed to do. That's why we've introduced the infrastructure bill, which I think he welcomes, and that bill will get Britain building so we can deliver on those 1.5 million new homes through our plan for change. In relation to the particular issue he raises, I know that he and my honourable friend, the member for Stroud, have been working together to try to resolve this issue as I understand it, and I'm happy to ensure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister if that would help in taking it further.
Sure, Jean Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend this Labour government's landmark reforms to get Britain building through our plan for change? Yes. I look forward to working with ministers to ensure developers deliver on what they promise to local residents, so that new homes also have access to roads, GP surgeries and dentists, and don't create an extra burden on hospitals like the William Harvey Hospital in my Ashford constituency. What is the Prime Minister's message to the blockers standing in the way of the homes and vital infrastructure our country needs?
Well, he's a dedicated campaigner for his constituents. Well, we know who's been standing in the way for the past 14 years. It's the party opposite, and they've learned absolutely nothing. The leader of the opposition claims that she's never opposed growth or development. That's not what she's telling her constituents, Mr. Speaker. Only last month she wrote in her newsletter that she'll keep working with Conservative colleagues to block a vital energy infrastructure project in her own backyard. She's not alone. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, Shadow Defence Secretary, Shadow DEFRA, they're all at it. What a bunch of blockers.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Mr. Speaker, the Employment Rights Bill will grant union equality representatives the right to paid time off work.
But it does.
Will the Prime Minister grant special constables the right to take unpaid leave to perform their duties?
I'm grateful to him for raising the question of special constables who play a very important role in our communities and keeping us safe. The numbers of special constables dropped under the last government. We support the existing employer-supported policing scheme and will support our special constables, but they dropped under the last government.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Long time.
I recently visited Middlesbrough's James Cook University Hospital and learned of the brilliant work in the neurosciences department for the survivors of stroke, brain and spinal injuries and many others. But it only has 18 rehabilitation beds to serve a population of some 1.4 million people, whereas the guidelines say it needs 80 beds, meaning that patients in the Tees Valley do not get the rehabilitation they need. So will the government remedy the position by ensuring that resources are allocated to meet the ambition to develop a world-class neurorehabilitation centre to serve the Tees Valley and beyond?
Well, I thank him for his question. It is important to hear about the important work that James Cook Hospital is doing in his constituency. We are investing £350,000 in research on interventions which support people with functional neurological disorders to rehabilitate them within the community. And of course, our plan for change invested £25 billion to cut waiting lists, speed up treatment and shift more care into the community. In relation to the hospital, I'll make sure he gets a meeting with the Minister to see what further can be done.
Sir John Whittingdale.
Will the Prime Minister look at the case of my constituents, Mr and Mrs Adrian Fenton, who returned home from visiting France in their motorhome to discover an illegal immigrant concealed in the bike rack? They reported it immediately to the police, only to receive a fine from the Border Force of £1,500. Will he agree that my constituents ought to be thanked rather than punished? And does he accept that this action will send a message to deter anybody from acting responsibly in the future?
Can I thank him for raising this important case on behalf of his constituents? I've seen some of the details and I am concerned about it, and I do think it's important, as he says, that the Home Office look into it, and therefore we will do so, and I'll make sure that he is updated in relation to that in due course.
Richard Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Veterans in Sefton, one of the many remarkable charities in my constituency, indicate that statistics can only partly measure the price paid by servicemen and women. Incidents of broken marriages, suicides, alcoholism, deep depression and homelessness among veterans remain largely unquantified. Given that, will my right honourable friend restate Labour's commitment to providing our veterans the holistic support they need and deserve?
Well, we owe an extraordinary debt to our veterans, Mr Speaker. We are committed to renewing the nation's contract with those who've served, and that includes the guarantees of homes for heroes for those who have served, dedicated mental and physical healthcare pathways in the NHS, and dedicated to sport to help those leaving service using their skills to find new and fulfilling careers.
Sarah Dyke.
Yesterday, with no notice, DEFRA closed SFI applications, leaving thousands of farmers who want to deliver public goods waiting for a year without support. So can the Prime Minister assure British farmers that they won't be left stranded and able to support environmental and food resilience goals due to lack of government support?
Well, Mr Speaker, as she knows, the SFI schemes have operated to provide quite considerable support so far. There have been a number of schemes. They've closed in the past, and then a new scheme has been put in place. They were closed in 2022 and 2023 by the party opposite without the 6 weeks' notice. But we do support farmers. We will be putting forward more details at the spending review. But the difference, Mr Speaker, in this government is we're funding the farmers. They failed to spend the budget.
Sultana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In October 2023, in an interview with LBC, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I think Israel does have that right," when asked if cutting off power and water to Gaza was appropriate. For 11 days now, Israel has blocked the entry of vital goods and aid into Gaza, subjecting over 2 million people to collective punishment and starvation. Israel's decision to also cut off electricity to a plant supplying drinking water to 500,000 people is yet another blatant violation of international law and further evidence of genocide against the Palestinian people. In light of these facts, does the Prime Minister still maintain that Israel is not committing genocide?
Look, I'm really appalled by Israel blocking aid when it is needed at greater volume and speed than it's ever been needed. Blocking goods and supplies and power entering Gaza risks breaching international humanitarian law, and it shouldn't be happening. And we are doing everything we can to alleviate that situation.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his extremely important upcoming discussions with other nations about Ukraine, will the Prime Minister focus on the fact that it was standard Russian procedure to take over other countries by having bogus elections and installing puppet governments? And will he therefore impress on other colleagues to be very wary of calls to hold elections in Ukraine during a wartime situation, which could result in the subversion and takeover by Russia of the entire country?
I thank him for raising a really important point, and the track record is there for all to see. On top of that, of course, we in this country did not hold elections when we were at war. That is a perfectly reasonable and normal course of behaviour. And yes, of course, that has to be part of our discussions as we go forward, including the meeting that I'm convening on Saturday.
Lord Hatton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. South Dorset is ready to play its part, making Britain a clean energy superpower. But after 14 years of Conservative failure, there are many untapped opportunities on our doorstep. Green investment opportunities such as Port Wind, Moor Wind and a hydrogen storage hub are all coming down the track. So can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that the Government will work with the Crown Court on these projects, invest in key infrastructure and ensure that South Dorset's green energy potential is hardwired into our plan for change?
Well, I thank him. He's absolutely right about making Britain a clean energy superpower. We are committing £2.3 billion to support hydrogen projects, and I recognise the huge potential of South Dorset to become home to a storage hub. We're ensuring public and private investment works together, and that's exactly what the Crown Estate Act does, unlocking significant investment, boosting offshore wind and kick-starting economic growth.
Andrew Rossendale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Leader of the Opposition has already mentioned, later today the Prime Minister will meet the family of our dear late colleague, Sir David Amess, who was so brutally murdered at his constituency surgery 3.5 years ago. I plead with the Prime Minister to reverse the decision to deny the family a public inquiry, despite similar inquiries being held into other tragic instances. So, will he please stop this shameful saga and heed the call of the Amess family for a judge-led public inquiry into David's death and the related failure of the Prevent programme from a heartbroken family?
Can I acknowledge just how heartbroken they are? It's difficult to imagine what they've gone through, what they continue to go through. And that's why it's very important that I meet them this afternoon, which I will do, and discuss with them all the questions they want to raise with me. Sir David was a respected and loved a colleague across this House, and as I say, I absolutely understand how his family must feel about the tragic circumstances in which he died and then everything that followed thereafter.
Final question, Chris Kay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow marks 29 years since 16 children and their teacher were murdered at Dunblane Primary School. In recent weeks, my constituents have raised with me the alarming fact that adverts offering handguns for sale are appearing on technology platforms like Google and YouTube. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that technology companies have an obligation to all of us to do everything proactively possible to prevent illegal advertising of this kind and not rely on a reactive, will remove it when it's reported approach, which is simply not good enough?
The thoughts, I'm sure, of the whole House are with the victims of the Dunblane massacres 29 years after the tragic event. The Online Safety Act will require online services to proactively remove such content from their platforms and prevent it appearing there in the first place. These duties fully take effect from Monday, and then we'll make sure that all companies meet their obligations.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Come to the statement. Minister Daniel Sychner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to update the House on the sustainable farming incentive. We stand on the edge of an unprecedented global transition for British farming. From leaving the European Union to the challenges of climate change and geopolitical events, we are asking more of farmers than ever before. To continue to produce the food that feeds the nation and protect the environment on which our long-term food security depends. And we are determined to create the conditions for farm businesses to be profitable and succeed. Now, we're proud to have secured £5 billion for farming over 2 years, the largest budget for sustainable food production in our country's history. That's £1.8 billion for customers already in agreements, £1 billion for farmers who are now in SFI agreements, and a further £150 million for farmers in the SFI pilot. And Labour has got that money out of the door and into farmers' pockets. We've invested to bring thousands more farmers into the ELM schemes, which I'm afraid were vastly underspent by the previous government, to make a record number of capital items available for the coming year to help farmers carry out actions under the SFI and countryside stewardship, with £600 million available for productivity, animal health and welfare innovation and other measures to support agricultural productivity, as well as 50 landscape recovery projects across the country. And we've responded directly to calls from the sector to roll out a new higher tier scheme and to increase payment rates so HLS agreement holders, many of them upland farmers, are fairly rewarded for their work. So we now have more than half of all farmers in schemes, 37,000 live SFI agreements, 50,000 farmers in ELM agreements. Under the SFI, 800,000 hectares of arable land being farmed without insecticides, 300,000 hectares of low-impact grassland managed sustainably, and 75,000 kilometres of hedgerows being protected and restored, which is a huge success for nature. And I want to thank all the farmers involved and to reassure them that all existing SFI agreements will be honoured. Farmers will continue to be paid under the terms of their agreement for its duration. If they entered into a 3-year SFI agreement earlier this year, they will be paid until 2028. If they submitted an SFI application, but this has not yet started, that will also be honoured, and all farmers who took part in the SFI pilot will be able to apply for an agreement. But the fact is, the high uptake of the scheme means it is now fully subscribed. Now, I'm afraid as a government, we inherited SFI with no spending cap, despite a finite farming budget, and that cannot continue. So we will continue to support farmers to transition to more sustainable farming models, including through the thousands of existing SFI agreements over the coming years and a revamped SFI offer. But this is an opportunity to improve how we do that under a fair and just farming transition. A transition that supports farms to be profitable businesses in their own right, through fairer supply chains, better regulation and greater market access, and that directs public funding in a fair and orderly way towards the priorities we've set out on food, farming and nature. So we will be strategic in how we design our schemes and responsible within the budget we have available. This is about using public money in a way that supports food production, restores nature and respects farmers as the business people they are. SFI can and must work better for all farms and for nature, and I'll set out the details of the revised SFI offer following the spending review, including when it will open for applications. We will work closely with the sector to design an improved scheme so they can tell us what works best for their businesses. We'll also put in place strong budgetary controls so that SFI is affordable to the public purse. The revised offer will align with our land use framework to better target SFI actions fairly and effectively, focusing on helping less productive land contribute to our priorities for food, farming and nature. But the underlying problem facing the sector is farmers do not make enough money, and the government is changing that. We announced the members obviously may laugh, but actually businesses do need to make money. They might need to know that. So we announced a new set of policies at NFU conference last month aimed at improving farm profitability, securing our food security and protecting nature. And through our farming roadmap, we're creating the conditions for farmers to run profitable businesses that can withstand future challenges. This decision is about investing in long-term stability. It's about a future where farmers are supported to run profitable businesses, where public money is used in a better way to better restore nature and to secure long-term food security.
Shadow Secretary of State Victoria Atkins.
Well, may I thank the Minister for an advance copy of his statement, which I'm going to pull apart in a moment. May I thank you also, Mr Speaker, for granting the urgent question that forced the Minister to the dispatch box, because they sneaked this statement out last night, presumably hoping nobody would notice. But guess what? The countryside has. Because the question that we are all asking ourselves is, what has this government got against farmers and the countryside? They sneaked this announcement out that they were halting the Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme immediately. This scheme replaced the EU's Common Agricultural Scheme when we left the EU. We set up this scheme with our Brexit freedoms to establish a farming policy that works for farmers, the environment and food production. Yet Labour pulled the plug without warning last night. This scheme is popular with farmers, and he doesn't have to take my word for it. To quote one, these schemes have the potential to be the most progressive and environmentally responsible schemes of their kind anywhere in the world. Those were the words of the former president of the CLA and father of the honourable member for Mid and South Pembrokeshire, who I'm sure will agree with his father's own analysis. Why then would this city-dwelling government stop such a successful scheme? In the word of the CLA president, Victoria Vivian, of all the betrayals so far, this is the most cruel. It actively harms nature, it actively harms the environment, and with war once again raging in Europe, to actively harm our food production is reckless beyond belief. Does the Minister think she's wrong? And yet, despite this, the Secretary of State, who, by the way, is missing in action, this is a significant statement which he has made, and he's sending out his junior minister to take the heat. Perhaps it's because the Secretary of State didn't want me to remind him of his own words in November, which was, he said, that farmers feel ignored, alienated and disrespected. Well, I do hope the Minister is going to be telling us how that's going now. The farming policy of this government can be summarised in 3 sentences. They will halt any farming and environmental scheme on which farmers rely without warning, without consultation, and using criteria they have never before defined. The state will seize their farmland at will through the compulsory purchase orders that were announced yesterday in the planning bill. And if families have managed to cling on to their farms despite all of this, then Labour will tax them for dying. But I'm delighted to hear that the Farming Minister himself conceded that farmers don't make enough money, so I hope that he's going to be changing the family farm tax. This adds up to nothing less than an outright assault on the countryside. As a proud rural MP, someone who actually likes the countryside, I'm already being contacted by constituents and farmers across the United Kingdom who have had the door slammed in their face with no notice and asking how they are meant to diversify, make a living and protect our countryside. Now, the Prime Minister said he understood the significance of losing a farm, acknowledging it can't come back, and warned against constantly moving the goalposts for the agricultural sector. Yet this is exactly what his government is doing. Yes. The statement issued by the government last night was a masterclass in Orwellian doublespeak. Yeah. It says the SFI scheme has, I quote, reached completion. Well, what criteria has the government used? Because it hasn't set those criteria out before. The government's own website stated that up to 6 weeks' notice would be given for the withdrawal as SFI. Why was this disregarded last night? And how does he recognise that by doing so, this government has betrayed trust in the farming community yet again? How many farmers does his department believe will now be caught out without an SFI agreement during the transition period of at least a year? And just as with the family farm tax, Labour has got its figures wrong. The CLA has asked me to ask the Minister what his government's ambitions are now for the 2/3 of farmers in England who are not currently in environmental schemes. How much have the vast cuts to BPS payments saved his department, and where has that money gone? Yeah. And how will the Secretary of State support upland farmers who were intending to move on to the sustainable farming incentives? And then, of course, there's the legal problems that this announcement last night has caused. How will the government meet its legally binding environmental targets, given they rely so heavily on the SFI scheme? And I do hope the Minister is going to be able to give us a good, clear legal analysis on the impact of changes to SFI on internal market competition law between England and other devolved authorities as a result of this change. Now, any words that the Minister uses about food security are meaningless in the face of this policy, particularly as we all know that this government has been delaying consideration and grants of these applications since the general election. So the figures he is using are wrong. The theory behind this policy is very questionable, and yet the government would have us all believe that he understands farming and the impact that this will have on farmers. They are in despair. And so my message to farmers is clear. We have got your back. We will please help you to hang on in there for the next 4 years. We will axe the family farm tax, and we will sort out this shocking mess of SFI to help build a bright future for British farming with British farmers.
Minister.
Well, really, I'd hoped that the Secretary of State would actually understand the way the schemes her own government created actually work. The problem we faced when we inherited, and there are others on her front bench who I think understand this better, will know that this time last year, these schemes were undersubscribed. They are now oversubscribed, and it's not a complicated thing to say that when the budget is spent, a responsible government responds to that. The budget is spent. The budget has been spent, and what we are doing in a sensible, serious way. The honourable members opposite should actually be celebrating the success of the fact that so many farmers are now in these schemes and taking them up. So I am absolutely confident that we will be able to sort out the mess that we have inherited. But basically, if you set up schemes without proper budgetary controls, you end up in this kind of position. We have had to take the hard decision that the previous government ducked.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister confirm that ELM scheme agreements will remain in place under this Labour government, including SFI, and there will be a new and better targeted SFI on offer as soon as possible, with details to follow in the spending review?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. It's absolutely the right point, and that's what we should be doing, reassuring people out there that people who are in schemes absolutely safe, absolutely carrying on as before. But the basic point is that when a scheme is full, it's full.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for sight of his statement in advance. The closure of the SFI from 6 p.m. last night came without warning or consultation, and it constitutes the breaking of the government's word to farmers. Farmers are already losing their basic payment this year, but are now excluded from the very scheme designed to replace that. Hasn't the Minister then broken his word to farmers and to all who care about nature? Will he clarify how much money he will save from the BPS cuts this year, and that therefore it is not true that SFI is overspent. Isn't it true that when the BPS cut is taken into account, more than £400 million of the £2.5 billion farming budget will remain unspent? A bigger budget is pointless if you do not spend it. This money was supposed to reward farmers for nature restoration and sustainable food production. Doesn't this damage both? There are 6,100 new entrants to SFI this year, and yet only a mere 40 of them are hill farms. Doesn't this prove that, because of the failure of the Conservatives in the last administration, the big landowners and the corporates are already comfortably inside the tent, but the farmers who are outside and now locked out without warning are Britain's poorest farmers in Britain's most beautiful places like mine in the lakes and the dales? As the Tories oversaw a 41% drop in hill farm incomes in just 5 years, isn't this a bitter blow that is unbearable for our upland farmers? This betrayal will outrage everyone who cares for our environment, for our upland nature and landscapes. It will outrage everyone who cares about food security. It will outrage everyone who cares about our tourism economy, and it will outrage everyone who clings to that old-fashioned expectation that governments should keep their word. On Monday, the Secretary of State came to my beautiful constituency to pose for pictures by Windermere. I wonder whether he might come back tomorrow and face up to the farmers who steward the stunning landscapes around our beautiful lakes and who he has abandoned so shamefully. Will he reopen SFI, honour his promises, or else turn his back on the very people who feed us?
Minister.
Well, again, I'm disappointed in the honourable gentleman's comments because he's a thoughtful person and he and I have debated these issues many times. I'm sorry he didn't welcome the uplift in HLS payments, which he and many others have been asking for a long, long time, which will benefit upland farmers. And I would take him back to many of the discussions that we have had about the importance of getting the farm budget out to farmers. That is what has happened. The full budget is actually being spent, and that should be celebrated.
Alex Sobel.
The fruit and vegetable aid scheme is an important lifeline for producers collaborating, and it has meant that we've had a huge increase in our tonnage of various fruit and vegetables. That scheme is finishing on the 31st December 2025. What future plans have we got to support fruit and vegetable producers to collaborate in 2026 and beyond?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. It's an important one. That is, of course, an EU legacy scheme, and we're considering the best way of taking that forward in future, but we're absolutely committed to supporting and working with the horticultural sector.
We have around 35 minutes remaining. Questions have to be short, and the Minister's response has to be on point and tight as well. Father of the House, Ted Woodley.
Will the Minister leave for a moment the hallowed cloisters of Cambridge and accept my invitation to take a rural ride through Lincolnshire, the breadbasket of England, to meet my farmers? Does he agree that sustainable farming is the key to food security, and therefore will he take up with his colleagues in the Department of Net Zero why they're covering 15% of Lincolnshire with solar farms, in addition to taking away this grant?
Minister.
Well, again, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question. I'd always be happy to visit Lincolnshire. I've done it on a number of occasions. But on the question of how we allocate our land, of course, it's very important that we make sure that the new land use framework works effectively, because that's the most rational way of making those decisions.
Julie Minns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's extremely welcome that under this government more money has been spent on schemes and more farmers are in schemes than was the case under the last government. However, there are smaller farms like those in my constituency of North Cumbria who would not have had their plans as far advanced as their larger neighbours, along with their consultants. Can I ask him to outline what support will be available to those smaller farms going forward?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, because she absolutely touches on the critical point that the schemes we inherited had no way of prioritising properly. It was a first-come, first-served scheme. So the kind of farmers that she's describing were disadvantaged. Now, we've had to work with a scheme that we inherited. We were very clear when I took over that we were not going to immediately overturn the existing system. We wanted to give people confidence about the future, but when we come to redesign the scheme, we can design it better to address the issues that my honourable friend has raised.
Chair Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I note the Minister's complaint that he inherited an uncapped budget. Can he tell the House, is this something that he just noticed on Monday, that he had to close the scheme without warning on Tuesday? On the 14th of January, the Director General from his department in charge of food, biosecurity and trade told my select committee, I do not think we can expect that every single farm will be viable. But if we are talking about 92–93% having the opportunity of productivity improvements, that's what we are aiming for. In other words, the government's aim is to lose 7 to 8% of our farms. What will that figure be after today's announcements?
Well, I'm always grateful for questions from the Right Honourable Gentleman who chairs the Select Committee. Those figures on future farm viability, of course, go all the way back to the Agriculture Act, where there was a serious attempt made to assess future farm viability. Now, this is why the Secretary of State and I are so determined that we absolutely address those problems around farm viability. They're not going to be supported forever by the public purse. We know that. So it's very important that we address all those range of issues. But I'm very happy to have a further conversation with you.
Sam Rushworth.
Shares with me a wish to see a bit more humility from the party opposite, given their failure to get the agricultural budget out of the door. But I would ask the Minister to please, if I could hear myself think a moment, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I could hear myself think, I would ask the Minister to ensure that every penny in SFI arrangements will be paid to farmers, but also that those who've already applied and who are eligible will have their applications taken forward.
I thank my honourable friend. I very much enjoyed visiting his constituency and talking to farmers there about these issues, and I can actually absolutely give him that commitment.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For those who have farming businesses, how does the Minister expect them to plan for the future when he sneaks an announcement out, like his department did last night, despite a message on his website saying we would give you 6 weeks' notice of any closure? What does he have against our farmers and against our food producers?
No. Well, the only thing I've got anything against is the previous government who set this scheme up in the first place and set it up in a way in which SFI 22 was closed in exactly the same way, SFI 23 was closed in exactly the same way, SFI 24 is only different in one sense, in that it is now oversubscribed rather than undersubscribed, and as a consequence, it would not have been possible to give notice because it would lead to a further spike in applications.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Minister has just alluded, it's called SFI 24. Might that be a clue in the title, and therefore it's perhaps less surprising than people are saying, given that it's now 2025?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and she makes a very sensible point, which is that we saw a succession of schemes announced by the previous government. What I want to get to is a scheme that will work for the long term. And she's absolutely right that I'm afraid the way it was set up by the previous government, it was first come, first served.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the overnight withdrawal of this funding is yet another blow against many of my farmers in King Swinford and South Staffordshire. The Minister still hasn't answered why he has broken his word that was clearly set out on the government website to give at least 6 weeks' notice, nor the chair of the Select Committee's question about if the reason for doing so was because the budget had become exhausted. When did that first come to his attention? Was it really yesterday afternoon?
Well, it first came to my attention 5 years ago during the passage of the Agriculture Act when I warned exactly that this would happen, because if you move from a basic payment system where everyone has an entitlement to a system that is based on bidding, this is what happens. So perhaps he should have woken up 5 years ago.
Cat Smith. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for coming to the House to make the statement. However, I did wake up this morning to many emails in my inbox from farmers across Lancaster and Wyre, and I would like to invite the Minister to join me, because I'm going to accept the invitation from my constituent Kath to visit her farm, because she was in the situation of her SFI application was ready to go. She's coming out the countryside stewardship agreement, so therefore she's been left in limbo, and I wondered if whether or not he would join me in meeting farmers across Lancaster and Wyre.
Minister.
Well, as I've said to many honourable members, I'm always happy to try and meet farmers whenever I can, and I'll add her to my list. But I absolutely understand the point she is making, but this was a fundamental problem with the schemes as designed that we have inherited. We need to do better in future, and that is what we will do as we redesign it.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What assurance can the Minister give farmers in my constituency, which were recently designated a SSSI in the Penwith area, as well as being supported, of course, by a recent designation of landscape recovery as well? Now they seem to be in a position where there's going to be no support for it at all. How are they going to adjust to this new regime, and what assurance can he give my farmers that the funding will be in place to support their actions in the SSSI?
Minister.
So there's some complexity in that question which I might need to address directly with the honourable gentleman, but landscape recovery is absolutely not affected by this, so it depends upon the exact nature of the application.
Campbell-Savers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister confirm more about the timetable for SFI 25 to provide some reassurance to my farmers in Penrith and Solway that we are going to deliver? And can he also explain a little bit more about how we ensure that more of my hill farmers get into the SFI scheme, which the last government failed to deliver on?
Minister.
As I said, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question. It's an important one because we will be working with farmers and organisations to redesign the schemes so it addresses that very question. Now, that will be taking place over the summer this year, and we'll, obviously, once we've had those conversations, we'll be able to announce exact timings. But he's absolutely right to raise the point that there has been no fair allocation of resources. It has been just on a first-come, first-served basis.
Charlie Dewhurst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, the Minister's own statement here says this decision is about investing in long-term stability. First, we've had the body blow of the family farm tax. We've had the reduction in BPS. We have the pulling of capital grants, and now the cancellation of SFI. How is any farming business expected to invest in the long term?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman is a sensible person who we've had many discussions with him over the years. When he says pulled, what he means is the grant, the budget was completed. And it's exactly the same in this case. And I do think it's important that honourable members opposite understand that you can't spend the same money twice. Now, they lived in a world of cakeism. We don't. And the money is spent. Once it's spent, you then have to move to a new set of schemes when you have the money available.
Andrew Pakes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for bringing the statement to the House and sharing such honesty about challenges in the scheme. Can I urge the Minister not to take any lectures from the party opposite, who oversaw a chaos in DEFRA and a £300 million underspend, a shameful reckon? And can I ask the Minister if he can assure the House and outline details to ensure that future schemes gets the money out the door, gets it into farmers' pockets and stops the waste and bureaucracy we've seen under the previous government in DEFRA?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I'm afraid I was genuinely dismayed by what I found when I came into the department, perhaps not entirely surprised, but we have spent the last 6 or 7 months trying to get control of this, because if you have a scheme which is not capped, not managed, no budgetary control, then you have a problem. The figure's £5 billion overall, the biggest amount for farming that we've had. We're going to make sure the money gets out to farmers.
Sarah Dyke.
Speaker, coming at a time of record low confidence in farming, many farmers in Glastonbury and Somerton will feel that this sudden closure of the SFI scheme will bring them closer to closing their farm gates for the very last time, at a time when food security is at an all-time low. So what communications are going to affected farming businesses, and what support will DEFRA give to those that are dealing with vulnerable farmers at the sharp end?
Well, I have to say I don't actually agree with some of the honourable lady's question, because the food security report that was published at the end of last year did not bear out her analysis. But the RPA has written to farmers today, setting out exactly the situation to give people reassurance.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the Minister surprised that the party opposite is now crying crocodile tears when they failed to get £350 million of SFI out into farmers' hands, and they failed to stop speculative acquisition of farmland by tax dodgers?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I'm afraid, as on so many other issues, we're having to clear up the mess that we inherited, and it will take time, but we are setting out a clear path for the future, which I hope over time people will come to support.
Paul.
I don't know how to break this to the Minister, but I don't know if he realises, but when the thousands of farmers come to Westminster, they're not coming to thank him or the Secretary of State. Yesterday we had the sustainable farming incentive announcement. Today, an announcement that there is to be no extension to his honourable friend from Leeds, to the fruit and vegetable aid scheme, no extension to that. And that, of course, follows the family farm tax. The announcement which the Minister has made today speaks very ill of the financial management of his department. I make no apologies to repeat the questions asked by my right honourable and honourable friends. When did he know that he was hitting his budget ceiling? When had he set that as a criteria? What discussions had he had with the Treasury to increase the budget? And why was he deliberately, I presume, misleading farmers by pledging a 6-week notice period, and it wasn't even 6 seconds?
Just before the Minister responds, the honourable member, he knows that he cannot use the term deliberately misleading, so I'll ask him to withdraw that statement.
Inadvertently misleading. Inadvertently misleading.
No. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will take the honourable gentleman back to the origins of this debate. When we moved from basic payments to these schemes, it was always the case that there were going to be a point where the budget was spent. So we've known it for 5 years. We've known it for 5 years. That would.
Terry Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Having spent several weeks and months encouraging farmers to access this scheme, naturally I'm disappointed with the closure and hope that there will be a replacement in short order. But the fact that I can find so many farmers in my constituency and elsewhere that weren't accessing this scheme, is that not evidence of the party opposite failing farmers over so many years?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. Actually, of course, the thing is that many farmers are now in these schemes and benefiting from them. And also, we're getting the environmental benefits that the whole process of transition away from basic payments to the environmental land management schemes was designed to achieve. So let me pay some credit to the party opposite. They set this train in motion, essentially. But what they didn't do was set up the schemes in a way that could properly be managed, and that is what we are now doing.
Ellie Childs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, this government pulled the rug out from underneath thousands of farmers by cancelling the SFI with zero notice, shamefully, despite saying that they would give 6 weeks, but without putting in place anything to support farmers going into the future. My inbox this morning is full of emails from multiple farmers despairing, who were on the point of submitting an application, had no way of planning for this, and now are utterly left in the lurch. How does the Minister expect the UK to make that vital transition to nature-friendly farming, boosting UK food production, if this is how they treat farmers?
Well, absolutely astonished at the honourable lady's contribution. She should be celebrating the fact that so many farmers are now farming in an environmentally sensitive way. And I'd invite her to help us make sure that in future these schemes work better. But this is actually a cause for celebration about the benefits of these environmental land management schemes.
Chris Hinchcliffe.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've also been contacted by concerned and impacted farmers in North East Hertfordshire. Can the Minister assure me that the revamped SFI alluded to will allow farmers to plan seasons ahead over the remainder of this Parliament as they need to?
Minister.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question. Quite clearly, over the last 5 years, we have all known that this was the transition that was happening. There was always going to be a point in this transition when we moved from basic payments to environmental land management schemes where it would be down to people applying for these schemes. So I understand my honourable friend's concerns, what I would encourage farmers to do is apply early in these schemes. It was a first-come, first-served scheme before. In the future, we'll try and make sure there's a better process for allocating, but that's the system we inherited.
Adam Dance.
One of the key messages from farmers at my forum I held in my constituency, Yeovil, was that they have lost trust in this government and investing in sustainable farming. Does the Minister recognising ending SFI with no warning has only worsened the loss of trust? And what plans does the government have to restore Yeovil's farmers' confidence in this government?
Well, I hear the honourable gentleman's question, but I would say that the fact that we've got so many people in agreements, so much land actually being farmed within these agreements, shows that many, many people in this country have absolute confidence in what we're doing.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. How on earth does the Minister correlate saying in his statement he wants to work with the sector when last night the government gave 30 minutes, just 30 minutes notice to the NFU, the sector, of this shameful cut to the SFI budget? What does that actually say about DEFRA's previous commitment to transparency, cooperation and co-design?
Minister.
Well, again, I'd say to the honourable gentleman that this has been a process going on for 5 years now, and that perhaps he should have looked a bit more closely at what was about to happen.
Carla Lockhart.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Minister, trust between farmers and this government is well and truly broken. Farmers feel betrayed, let down, and many are at breaking point. The closure of the SFI is a bitter and I believe a calculated blow on top of the family farm tax grab, and it will be the final straw for many British farmers, the people who feed us. How can the Minister justify sending over £500 million to farms in Africa, Asia and South America and stripping support for our own homegrown farmers?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable lady for her question, but I would just point out this is a scheme that relates to England, and the different devolved governments have different schemes. But in terms of the question about international aid, I would say that the key thing for us is to make sure that we support our farmers here, which is why we're spending a record £5 billion on farming over the next 2 years.
Martin Vickers.
The one thing in the Minister's statement that farmers in my Brigg-in-Immingham constituency would agree with is that they are not making enough money. When I hope the Minister takes up the Father of the House's invitation to visit Lincolnshire, will he agree to meet face-to-face with my farmers and explain to them exactly what his government are doing to increase their profitability?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. We've had many exchanges across the chamber over the years. I'd be very happy to speak to his farmers and particularly talk to him about the work we're doing on supply chain fairness, which is very important to me.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Farmers in North Shropshire are really keen to improve the environment and farm in a friendly way, but they're also running businesses and they need to plan. There are farmers in my constituency who are hoping to apply for grants to raise the water table in peat soil areas. Those grants hadn't even opened, that's why they hadn't applied, and now the opportunity's gone. Can he tell us what he's going to do to enable farmers to plan and what the replacement scheme is going to look like?
Well, the honourable lady raises an important question. SFI is only one part of the set of schemes that the department has to work with farmers on nature restoration, and my colleague is just telling me we have £300 million available for peat restoration, so there are other schemes available.
Dr. Luke Evans.
No notice and the scheme immediately closed. The Minister says it's full, it's complete. When did he know this, and why didn't he tell the farmers it was going to happen?
Exactly.
I think there's still a misunderstanding about how these schemes work. If you have a first-come, first-served scheme, and people have known for weeks and weeks and weeks, months, that it would be full at some point. So there comes a point where you have to make a decision, and if you are working within your budgets properly, you can hardly say a week or two before that suddenly it's going to close, because you then get a spike in applications. It's like a run on a bank. I'm afraid, basically, when the scheme is finished, it's finished.
Ross Savage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Nature and food, farming and farmers are the absolute foundation of British life in every sense, and this change is deeply regrettable. Can the Minister assure this House that every support will be given to farmers to adapt to these changes and to give them the help with The time, the technology that they don't have, they are already on their knees. Please can the Minister assure this House that the necessary support will be given to stop them from buckling under the load of these successive changes?
Minister.
Well, I hear the Honourable Lady's question, but I'll just repeat to her, with 50,000 farmers in ELM agreements, the majority of farmers are already working with us to make that change to environmentally friendly farming. It was never clear how many of the overall numbers of farmers would make the transitions into the new schemes. Obviously, it's not a matter of compulsion. We invite people to apply, and they were invited to apply last year. When the new scheme comes along, I invite people to apply then.
Andrew Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is here, ducking and dodging questions like a Poundland Alistair Campbell at the minute. He started out with "we knew" 5 years ago, then just very quickly it turned to just weeks ago. He said that this is cause for celebration. I don't think I'll be finding any of my farmers that will be celebrating this. And I would just like to say to the Minister, come and speak and say these things directly to farmers' faces and see the response you get rather than the comfort there. Do you really want to be a minister that much? You're willing to say such ridiculous things. You can find money for lots of other projects. So just simply come to Fylde and speak to the farmers.
Minister.
Well, I was going to say I was grateful for the question, but I'm not sure I was really. What I would actually like to do is to invite the honourable gentleman to come and talk to people who are engaged in nature-friendly farming, who benefit from these schemes and who are actually undertaking the transition that I would give the previous government credit for on starting out for. We wanted to move away from the common agricultural policy to a new system. That is what we are doing. The schemes weren't designed well enough in my view, and that is what we are now addressing.
Vicky Slade.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I was contacted by the Great Big Dorset Hedge Initiative 3 weeks ago, who told me that capital grants under SFI had already been frozen. Can the Minister confirm when the decision to close was actually made, whether applications submitted will be granted and how long they'll have to wait? And as farmers are already obliged to improve hedges with more than 10% gaps under their agreements, how will they access funding to do so to enable their existing funding to be maintained?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady raises an important set of points there. We now have 75,000 kilometres of hedgerow within these schemes. The basic point is that we have a fixed budget, and just as with the capital grants, when they're spent, they're spent. There will be another set of grants available in the future, and I'd invite her constituents to apply at that point. But what we cannot get away from is there is not an endless supply of money, and we have to work within the budgets.
Lewis.
I understand the Minister's point that it's been known all along that at some point the fixed budget would be exhausted. A simple question for him. On which day were ministers first informed that that budget had been exhausted? Yes.
Minister.
Well, we made the decision yesterday because we reached that point.
Caroline Warden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's beginning to feel a little bit like a game of top trumps between who can cause the most financial unpredictability to farmers, be it the botched ELMS rollout or cancelling this scheme at a moment's notice. We know that half of Britain's fruit and veg farmers expect to go out of business, and the Minister has said that he will support farmers to be profitable through fairer supply chains. So could the Minister explain to the House what that is going to look like?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for that's a very big question. What I would point her to is the fair dealing clauses in the Agricultural Act, which were brought forward. Some of them in the dairy sector already. We're working at the pig sector soon. Basically, sector by sector, we're trying to sort out the improvements that are needed to get fairness through the supply chain. It's a very big, difficult, complicated question, but it's essential for the future.
Deputy Brown.
The announcement sneaked out with no notice last night. The Minister will know, if he knows anything about farming, that farming takes months, if not years, to plan. Yeah. They had no notice of this. Will the Minister now tell us what is to replace it, when he's going to consult, and when it's likely to come into operation?
Minister.
I'm grateful for the question because it is what we will do is over the next few months, through the spending review, we'll be reviewing how we can improve the scheme to avoid the very quick point that he has just outlined, and that I'll be reporting back to the House later in the summer.
Ben Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Having met with young farmers at Duchy College in North Cornwall last week, it's clear confidence in the farming sector is at an all-time low, with many looking for alternative careers. with the government's hammer blow to SFI payments on top of the family farm tax, what plans does the Minister have to incentivise young people to get into farming? Now they face a huge tax bill upon inheriting their family farm and will no longer be incentivised for environmental stewardship and sustainable farming.
Well, I completely disagree with the premise of the question, as the honourable gentleman will probably realise, because he's right to say we need to get generational change into farming, and there are a number of ways in which that can happen. But no, I'm not laughing at it at all. It's a very, very serious point here. I am genuinely concerned about the future of the farming sector unless we get generational change. We'll be looking closely at how we can do that in future. But in terms of stability, having the £5 billion budget that we've secured was a very, very good first step.
Ms. Bramfuller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My farmers in Chichester are exhausted with the ever-changing schemes and the time it takes to apply for those schemes. So imagine their surprise when they find out that the SFI scheme has closed, not with no notice, I think that's unfair, with 30 minutes notice given to the NFU as opposed to the 6 weeks that they were promised, and at a time when BPS schemes are significantly reducing. What communication and support is going to be given for those family farms that have missed out on this round of SFI funding?
Minister.
Again, I thank the honourable lady for her question. What I would say is that it should have been clear to people for a long, long time that this transition was coming, because that was the move away from a system based on entitlements for every farmer through the basic payment system to a system that relied on people applying to what was essentially a fixed budget. Now, I agree with her, and I agree with many of the other contributions, that the way the system was set up did not allow proper prioritisation or fairness in terms of allocation. That's what we would like to change in future. But that's the system we inherited. And I'm afraid that is where we are at the moment. But remember, the vast majority, or the majority certainly, are already in schemes. And for those that have not yet come forward, what I'd gently say for the future is the advice is probably for these kind of schemes, it's better to apply earlier rather than to wait.
Jeff Aquarone.
The sudden completion of the SFI scheme will be a worry to many farmers and local people. I'm also very concerned by reports that the NFU were only given 30 minutes notice on such a huge change. Can the Minister assure my farmers that DEFRA will learn lessons from poor communication and lack of clarity that's plagued this scheme and other initiatives in the past to give them the confidence they need going forwards?
Minister.
Well, let me perhaps repeat the point. This is not about communication. If you've got a scheme which has got a fixed amount of money in it and you suddenly say it's going to close in 2 or 3 weeks, then you will get a surge in applications and you'll have to close it the same day. So that is a flaw in the way the scheme was designed originally. We want to do better in future.
Danny Chambers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. International events have pushed national security right up the agenda, and I'm sure we've got cross-party acknowledgement that food security is a vital part of national security. Given the changing geopolitical situation now, has there been an impact assessment on changes to farming budgets like this removal of SFI and other stresses on farming budgets and cash flow on our food security?
Well, the honourable gentleman makes an important point, and I would refer him back to the food security report that was published. But there's been no change to the amount of money available. The £5 billion budget is there. This is a discussion about who gets it.
John Milne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister explain to my farmers in Horsham why he did not feel any need to have any consultation with any farming stakeholder in advance of this announcement?
Minister.
Well, again, I'd refer the honourable gentleman to the question I raised earlier. It's first come, first served scheme. If you start having a consultation, everybody applies that day and you have to shut it at that point. This is a flaw in the way the scheme was designed.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is much liked in this chamber, and we all know that. However, it is disappointing to hear of the pausing of a new application for sustainable farming incentives for farms in England. It is understandable, of course, that this would be seen as a betrayal to so many farmers. In Northern Ireland, agriculture support is different, but nonetheless, the central funding comes from this government centrally here. So can the Minister assure that funding for Northern Ireland farmers, which comes from here, will not be reduced or falter as a result of today's announcement, and steps will be taken to protect our agriculture industry and our farmers, which are the backbone of our economy? Thanks so much.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his kind words, and I suspect we shall renew our acquaintance in Westminster Hall this afternoon. But I can assure him that this announcement will make no difference to the funding arrangements for Northern Ireland.
That concludes the point of order, Victoria Atkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has been asked repeatedly why no notice was given to farmers of the closure of this scheme. He has given a range of answers, including, and I quote, people knew weeks ago, months ago, about this closure, and even stretching to 5 years ago. This is very important, not least because business decisions are having to be made on the fly today, but also, of course, there may be legal consequences to the answer the Minister has given. So how can we encourage the Minister to correct the record and state the fact that no notice was given to farmers?
I'm grateful for the Right Honourable Member for giving notice of her point of order. The Chair is not responsible for the accuracy of Minister's statements in the House, but she has put her point of order on the record. I don't believe that the Minister wishes to respond, and I will end that there. The next point of order is Marie Tidbill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to correct the record and also make a declaration of interest. In my excitement in making my first intervention on the Employment Rights Bill yesterday, I did not point members to my register of interest, nor my proud membership of Community Union, GMB and Unison. So I would like to ensure that is on the record, as with my register of interest. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for advance notice of her point of order. I know that she had been diligent in seeking advice on how and when to declare interest, which has now been placed on the record. Point of order, Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The former Defence Minister, the Right Honourable Member for South West Wiltshire, on May the 21st, 2024, published records of blood and urine tests relating to nuclear test veterans. He said at that time there were 150. It's now become clear from correspondence from a court case brought by the British nuclear test veterans there are 370 documents mentioning blood and urine. This includes 265 previously unseen and unreleased. This raises the possibility, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you will appreciate, that the AWE misled ministers about the number of records, and then inadvertently and entirely innocently, the minister brought the wrong information to this House. I seek your guidance on how the government can both correct the record but also publish those extra records. The nuclear test veterans deserve nothing less.
I am grateful to the honourable member for giving notice of his point of order. The Chair is not responsible for the accuracy of ministerial statements in the House, but he has indeed put his point on the record, and no doubt the Treasury benches are taking note and listening. Now, I'll give the front benches a few moments to swap over before we move on to the 10-minute rule motion. 10-minute rule motion, Liam Conlon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to report to Parliament on the potential merits of disregarding payments received under the Mother and Baby Institutions Payment Scheme operated by the Government of Ireland for the purposes of taxation, means-tested social security payments and social care capital limits, and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, Philomena Lee was 18 years old when she became pregnant in 1952 and was sent to Sean Ross Abbey Mother and Baby Home in Roscrea, County Tipperary in Ireland. Here Philomena gave birth to her son Anthony, and here they both lived until Anthony reached the age of 3 and Philomena was cruelly forced to give him up for adoption. Anthony was sold to a couple in the United States. Philomena would never see him again. Almost 60 years on, Philomena's story reached a global audience when it was made into the Oscar-nominated film Philomena, starring Dame Judi Dench and Steve Coogan. The film chronicles the time Philomena spent in Sean Ross Abbey and her painstaking search for her long-lost son decades later with the help of author Martin Sixsmith. I wish Philomena's story was an isolated one. Sadly, it is not. Philomena is one of tens of thousands of women and their infant children who spent time in mother and baby homes across Ireland for the perceived sin of becoming pregnant outside of marriage. The women were regularly used as unpaid labour, and infant mortality was alarmingly high. They experienced harsh conditions, mistreatment and abuse, both physical and psychological. In certain homes, women were routinely separated from their children, with some being adopted against the wishes or even knowledge of their mothers, as happened to Philomena Lee and her son Anthony. As a direct result of the abuse and trauma they experienced, many mother and baby home survivors moved to England. In some cases, they came here because they thought that disappearing from their home country was the only way to protect their families' reputations. And so for decades, thousands of survivors, including here in Britain, lived in secrecy and shame. It wasn't until 2021 they finally received an apology from the then Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, for what he described as a profound generational wrong visited upon Irish mothers and their children. This was followed by the Mother and Baby Institutions Payment Scheme, which opened to applications last March. The scheme represents a measure of accountability for what happened, recognising the lifelong impact that time spent in these institutions will have. It's an impact that will be felt in all corners of a survivor's life, from earning potential and financial security to physical and mental health and well-being. Ultimately, the scheme aims to acknowledge the suffering and improve the circumstances of former residents of mother and baby homes, which is why it is wrong that up to 13,000 survivors living here in Britain today risk losing their benefits if they accept this compensation. Under our current rules, any money accepted through